Hello, everyone. This is Samuel L. Jackson. Yo, listen here. First things first, happy holidays, everybody. Merry Christmas, happy Hanukkah, happy whatever you're celebrating this time of year. Look, I know the world's a little crazy right now, so take a minute, breathe, grab some coffee, some eggnog, whatever you need. You're back here with me, and you already know the rules. This is the future in view, and we don't sugarcoat things here. We talk straight, we talk real. And most importantly, we talk to you like you're the only person who matters in this room, because to me, my friend, you are. Before we get into the heavy stuff today, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button for the Future in View channel. I know everybody asks for it, but between you and me, that subscription means something. It's like saying, hey, I trust what you're saying here and I want to hear more. It's personal. It means everything to me when one of you hits that button. So please do it for me right now. Just one click. Go ahead. I'll wait. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about something that's been making my head spin all week. I want to talk with you today about something that just happened, something that's being completely misunderstood by almost everyone watching the news right now. Over the last 72 hours, you've probably seen the headlines. You've probably heard the outrage, the panic, the celebrations, depending on which channel you were watching. And if you've been paying attention to markets, you've seen something that doesn't quite add up with the story being told. But here's what I need you to understand. What just unfolded wasn't what it appeared to be. And the investors who are reacting emotionally right now, the ones selling in fear or buying in excitement without understanding the mechanics, they're about to learn a very expensive lesson about how power actually transfers in the global economy. Let me start with what everyone knows. Days ago, the president made an announcement that 75 years of American foreign policy said could never happen. An announcement that previous administrations, Republican and Democrat alike, treated as unthinkable. The kind of decision that changes not just diplomatic relationships, but the entire architecture of how capital flows, how alliances function, and how markets price risk. The United States withdrew from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Trump framed this as America finally standing up for itself. He said Europe had been freeloading for decades, that they weren't paying their fair share, that America was being taken advantage of. He promised this would force Europe to respect American power. The announcement came with all the usual bravado. America first, America strong, America doesn't need anyone. But here's what Trump didn't understand, and this is critical. Europe had stopped counting on American reliability years ago. Now, I've been investing through enough market-shifting events to know that the first reaction is rarely the correct one. I've watched currencies collapse. I've watched entire sectors get rewritten overnight. I've seen geopolitical earthquakes that everyone said would destroy markets, only to watch smart money quietly repositioning while everyone else panicked. And I've learned that the most important question isn't what just happened. It's what happens 72 hours later when the smoke clears and you can finally see who was prepared and who wasn't. And that's exactly where we are right now, 72 hours past the announcement. And what's emerging isn't chaos. It's something Trump never anticipated. The kind of clarity that separates leaders who understand structural power from those who only understand television ratings. Let me tell you what I noticed first, because it tells you everything you need to know about how badly the administration miscalculated. When markets opened the morning after the announcement, I watched European defense stocks very carefully. Conventional wisdom said these stocks should have crashed. The logic Trump's team was counting on seemed simple. European defense companies depend on American partnerships, American technology transfers, American security guarantees. Remove America from the equation, and Europe would panic. They'd come crawling back. They'd agree to whatever terms Trump demanded: Rheinmetall, Thales, BAE Systems, Leonardo, Saab. Analysts were predicting 10% drops, maybe 15%. Pension funds were bracing for carnage. Short sellers were positioning for collapse. The Trump administration was watching these stocks, waiting for Europe to blink. And then the market opened. These stocks dipped 2%, maybe 3% in some cases. And then something happened that no one in the White House expected. By noon, they'd recovered. Some of them closed higher than they'd opened. Now, think about that for a moment. The largest military alliance in history just dissolved. American protection just vanished. And European defense stocks barely flinched. That's not what panic looks like. That's not what uncertainty looks like. That's what preparation looks like. That tells you that someone somewhere knew something Trump didn't. That tells you this story didn't start 72 hours ago in the Rose Garden. It started months ago, maybe years ago, in rooms Trump never had access to. And that should have been his first warning, because what happened next is where this story stops being about diplomacy and starts being about the largest transfer of economic and military power since the end of World War II. And if you're not paying attention to this, if you think this is just another news cycle that will fade in a week, you're going to miss one of the most significant restructurings of global capital in your lifetime. Yesterday, while American media was still processing the shock, while Republican senators who had cheered the withdrawal were suddenly going quiet, while Trump's own advisors were reportedly trying to understand what they just triggered, Europe made an announcement. Not a proposal, not a summit, not a discussion about future possibilities. An announcement of something already built, already financed, already operational. They called it the European Defense Union. $2 trillion. Let me say that again so you understand the scale. $2 trillion, not proposed over the next decade, not contingent on parliamentary approvals. Structured, financed, and ready to deploy right now. An integrated command structure that doesn't need American approval. Unified procurement systems that don't depend on American technology. Domestic supply chains that bypass American contractors entirely. But here's the part that should terrify anyone who thought Trump's move was strategic. Europe didn't just build a European alliance. They built a global one. They invited Canada, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Norway to join as full partners. Not observers, not secondary members. Full partners with the same access, the same procurement rights, the same decision-making power as Germany or France. Think about what that means. The largest military-industrial build-out since World War II just launched, and it doesn't include the United States. And American defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, General Dynamics, just lost access to a market they've dominated for 75 years, a market worth trillions, a market that kept American defense innovation ahead of everyone else. Gone, not because of competition, because Trump handed it to them. Now, you might be wondering, how is this possible? How do you structure $2 trillion in 72 hours? And that's the question that should tell you everything about how completely Trump misread the situation. You don't structure $2 trillion over a weekend. You don't coordinate 8 governments in 3 days. You don't build integrated command systems and unified procurement frameworks while everyone's still reading the headlines. Europe had been preparing for this quietly, methodically, while Trump was threatening to leave NATO, while he was demanding higher payments, while he was treating allies like protection racket clients. Europe was building the alternative. They were running the numbers. They were negotiating with partners. They were structuring the financing. They were doing everything necessary to make sure that when America finally walked away, Europe wouldn't beg. They'd move on. And Trump's withdrawal didn't surprise them. It freed them. Let me explain what I mean by that, because this is where the economic implications become unavoidable. For years, European leaders had wanted to build independent defense capabilities. They wanted to reduce dependence on American weapon systems. They wanted control over their own security decisions, but they couldn't. Not while NATO existed, because NATO's structure meant that any major European defense initiative had to be coordinated with Washington. It had to use American systems. It had to integrate with American command structures. Europe was locked into American military dominance, not because they chose it, but because the architecture of the alliance made independence nearly impossible. Trump just unlocked that door, and Europe walked through it so fast. it's clear they'd been waiting with their bags already packed. Now, let's talk about what this means for American defense contractors, because this is where the market implications become impossible to ignore. For 75 years, NATO guaranteed American defense companies access to European procurement. When Germany bought fighter jets, they bought American. When Poland upgraded tanks, they bought American. When Italy needed missile systems, they bought American. Not always, but overwhelmingly, because NATO interoperability requirements meant everyone had to use compatible systems, and America defined compatibility. That just ended permanently. The European Defense Union doesn't require American interoperability. It requires European interoperability. That means when Germany buys fighter jets now, they're buying from Airbus or Dassault. When Poland upgrades tanks, they're buying from Rheinmetall. When Italy needs missile systems, they're buying from Leonardo and the partner countries, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Australia. They're not locked into American systems anymore either. They can buy European, they can buy from each other. They have options they didn't have a week ago. And here's where it gets worse for American companies. European defense spending is about to explode. We're not talking about modest increases. We're talking about the largest sustained defense buildup in European history. $2 trillion is just the initial commitment. Analysts are already projecting this could grow to 4 or 5 trillion over the next decade, and American companies just got locked out of all of it. Let me give you some numbers so you understand the scale of what just happened. Last year, American defense contractors exported roughly $90 billion in weapons and systems to NATO countries. That's not total revenue. That's just exports to allies. And that number was growing. It was projected to reach $120 billion within 5 years. Those projections just became worthless because it's not just about current contracts. It's about future ones. It's about the next generation of fighters, the next generation of drones, the next generation of missile defense. All of that was supposed to be American technology sold to European buyers. Now it's European technology sold to European buyers. And the development costs, the research funding, the innovation cycles that American companies were counting on to stay ahead of China, that funding just got cut off. But here's what makes this even more significant. This isn't just about defense, it's about technology. Because modern defense systems aren't just weapons, they're AI systems, they're advanced materials, they're cyber capabilities that spill over into civilian sectors, into aerospace, into computing, into manufacturing. For 75 years, America's dominance in civilian technology was partially subsidized by defense spending. The reason Silicon Valley exists is because defense contracts funded the early research that became the internet, GPS, microprocessors. When you cut American companies out of European defense spending, you're not just cutting revenue, you're cutting the research ecosystem that keeps American technology ahead. And Europe knows this. That's why they structured the European Defense Union the way they did. They're not just building weapons, they're building a technology ecosystem that competes with America across every advanced sector. And they're doing it with a $2 trillion head start that Trump just handed them. Now, let's talk about what this means for the dollar, because this is where the long-term implications become genuinely concerning. For decades, the dollar's dominance in global finance was supported by 3 pillars: America's massive economy, America's control of global energy markets, and America's role as the security guarantor for the developed world. Trump just kicked out the 3rd pillar. Here's how it works. When countries depend on America for defense, they hold dollars. Because defense procurement happens in dollars. Because military aid happens in dollars. Because the entire architecture of security relationships was denominated in dollars. That created constant demand for the currency, which kept it strong, which kept American borrowing costs low, which allowed the United States to run massive deficits without consequence. But when Europe builds an independent defense structure, they don't need to hold as many dollars. They can procure in euros, they can finance in euros. Their partner countries can trade with them in euros or yen or yuan, and slowly, gradually, the structural demand for dollars that has underwritten American power since World War II starts to erode. We're not talking about the dollar collapsing next week. We're talking about a long-term shift in the architecture of global finance, the kind of shift that happens slowly, then suddenly. And 50 years from now, historians might point to Trump's NATO withdrawal as the moment when the dollar's dominance began its inevitable decline. Now, I want to dig deeper into something that most analysts are completely missing: the partner countries that just joined the European Defense Union. Canada, Japan, South Korea, Australia, Norway. On the surface, these look like natural additions: democratic allies, advanced economies, established defense industries. But when you look closer, you see something more calculated, something that reveals just how strategically Europe approached this. Canada gives them access to rare earth minerals and advanced materials. Japan brings semiconductor manufacturing and precision engineering. South Korea offers shipbuilding capacity and missile technology that rivals anything America produces. Australia provides critical minerals and geographic positioning in the Indo-Pacific. Norway brings Arctic expertise and energy resources. Each of these countries fills a specific gap in the supply chain. And notice what's missing: no countries that are economically dependent on China, no countries with authoritarian governments, no countries that would give America leverage to disrupt the alliance through economic pressure. Europe didn't just invite partners. They chose them specifically to minimize American influence over the alliance's future. And there's something else happening here that's even more significant. Each of these countries has been frustrated with American reliability in recent years. Canada has faced Trump's trade threats. Japan has questioned America's commitment to the Pacific. South Korea has worried about America's willingness to maintain troop presence. Australia has watched American foreign policy swing wildly between administrations. These aren't countries that Europe had to convince. These are countries that were already looking for alternatives to American security guarantees. Trump didn't just create an opportunity for Europe. He created an opportunity for every American ally that's been nervous about our reliability. And Europe gave them all an off-ramp at the same time. Now, let's talk about the military bases, because this is where the immediate practical consequences start to hit home. The United States currently operates over 70 military installations across European NATO countries: Ramstein in Germany, Aviano in Italy, Incirlik in Turkey, RAF Lakenheath in the UK. These aren't just symbolic presences, they're logistics hubs, they're forward operating bases. They're the infrastructure that allows America to project power into the Middle East, into Africa, into Central Asia. And every single one of them exists because of NATO agreements that just became void. Europe hasn't announced anything yet about base closures, but you don't need an announcement to understand what's coming. When you build an independent defense structure, you don't need another country's military taking up your most strategic real estate. Give it 6 months, maybe a year, European governments are going to start raising questions about lease terms, about costs, about whether these bases serve European interests or just American ones. Best case scenario, America faces dramatically higher costs to maintain these bases. Worst case, we lose access entirely. And losing those bases doesn't just hurt American military capabilities. It devastates the local economies that have built up around them. Tens of thousands of American contractors, civilian employees, and service members stationed in Europe. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs across the entire ecosystem. Trump's withdrawal didn't just change military strategy. It put a massive chunk of the American defense economy at risk. But let me bring this back to something more immediate, because I know most of you are wondering what this means for your investments right now. First, American defense stocks are going to face sustained pressure. Not a collapse, but a long-term repricing. These companies just lost access to one of their largest growth markets. Wall Street hasn't fully absorbed that yet. You're seeing some volatility, sure, but give it 6 months. when the earnings calls start acknowledging canceled contracts and revised revenue projections, when the guidance gets cut for fiscal 2026 and beyond, you're going to see valuations adjust downward significantly. If you're overweight Lockheed, Raytheon, Northrop, Boeing's defense division, now is the time to start rebalancing, not panic selling, strategic reduction. Second, European defense stocks just became legitimate long-term holds. Rheinmetall, Thales, BAE Systems, Leonardo, Saab. These companies are about to experience demand growth they haven't seen since the Cold War. $2 trillion doesn't get spent in a year. It gets spent over a decade, maybe longer. That's sustained revenue growth with government-backed contracts. That's exactly the kind of visibility that value investors pay premiums for. And right now, before Wall Street fully reprices these opportunities, you can still get in at reasonable valuations. Third, watch the euro. I've been tracking currency markets for more than 50 years. And I can tell you that what we're about to see is a structural shift in demand. When you build a $2 trillion defense ecosystem denominated in euros, you create persistent demand for the currency. When partner countries start holding more euro reserves to participate in that ecosystem, demand increases further. When procurement contracts get signed in euros instead of dollars, the shift accelerates. The euro has been undervalued relative to economic fundamentals for years, partly because markets assumed European security would always depend on America. That assumption just died. Watch for euro strength over the next 18 to 24 months. Fourth, the defense supply chain is about to see European investment that dwarfs anything we've witnessed in decades. Advanced materials companies, rare earth processors, precision manufacturing, cybersecurity firms, semiconductor producers. Any company positioned in the supply chain that feeds into defense production is going to see order books fill up fast. And this isn't speculative demand. This is government-backed multi-year contract demand, the most reliable kind. Look at companies like Hensoldt in Germany or Kongsberg in Norway. These aren't household names yet, but they're about to become essential suppliers to the largest defense buildup of the century. Get familiar with these names now before the institutional money piles in. Fifth, watch what happens to American technology companies that have significant European operations. Microsoft, Google, Amazon. These companies have been building out cloud infrastructure and AI systems across Europe. A lot of that build-out was predicated on potential defense and government contracts, on the assumption that NATO interoperability meant American tech companies would have an inside track. That assumption is now questionable when Europe builds independent command and control systems, when they develop their own AI for battlefield management, when they create their own secure communications infrastructure. They're going to prioritize European tech companies. Not out of spite, out of security concerns. You don't build an independent defense structure and then run it on another country's cloud servers. Companies like SAP, Atos, Dassault Systems, Capgemini are about to see government contracts and defense-related business that was previously going to American companies. Sixth, let's talk about commodities, because defense buildups don't run on good intentions. They run on steel, aluminum, copper, rare earths, titanium. When you're building tanks, planes, ships, missiles at scale, you need industrial quantities of raw materials. Europe is about to start buying commodities at a pace we haven't seen since they were rebuilding after World War II. If you're not positioned in industrial metals right now, you should be. Not through speculation on short-term price moves, but through long-term positions in companies that mine, process, and supply the materials that defense manufacturing requires. The demand cycle we're entering isn't going to peak in 6 months. It's going to build for years. And seventh, this is going to accelerate the move toward multipolarity in ways most investors aren't prepared for. We've spent the last 30 years assuming American dominance was permanent, assuming that global capital would always flow toward American markets, that the dollar would always be the reserve currency, that American companies would always have first access to the world's most lucrative markets. That era is ending. What we're watching right now is the developed world reorganizing itself around multiple power centers. Europe just built one. China built one over the last 20 years. India is building one. And America is discovering that maintaining dominance isn't automatic. It requires maintaining relationships. It requires being reliable. It requires not walking away from 75 years of alliances because you think you can get a better deal. Trump didn't understand that, and now we're all going to live with the consequences. Now, I want to step back for a moment and talk about what this reveals about power, because this is something Trump fundamentally misunderstood. Power isn't just about size. It's not about having the biggest economy or the most weapons or the loudest voice. Real power, sustainable power, is about relationships. It's about the architecture of dependence. It's about being the country that others need, not the country that others fear. For 75 years, Europe needed the United States. They needed American protection, American weapons, American security guarantees. And that need gave America influence. It gave America leverage. It gave America the ability to shape European decisions on trade, on technology, on foreign policy, on everything that mattered. Trump looked at that relationship and saw weakness. He saw America giving and Europe taking. He saw freeloading. He saw unfairness. And he decided the way to fix it was to demand more, threaten more, and ultimately walk away. But what he didn't understand is that leverage works both ways. Yes, Europe needed America, but America needed Europe too. America needed the market access. America needed the forward bases. America needed the diplomatic support. America needed the technological partnerships. And most importantly, America needed Europe to not have alternatives. The moment Trump walked away, he handed Europe the freedom to build those alternatives. And they did it so fast, so completely, so decisively that it's obvious they'd been preparing for exactly this moment. This is what happens when you treat allies like clients, when you weaponize relationships that took generations to build, when you assume that because you're bigger, you can dictate terms without consequence. You don't strengthen your position. You teach the other side how to live without you. And once they learn that lesson, once they build the systems and structures that make them independent, you don't get that leverage back. It's gone permanently. Trump thought he was calling Europe's bluff. He thought they'd panic, cave, agree to whatever terms he wanted. But Europe wasn't bluffing. They were preparing. They were building. They were creating the alternative infrastructure that would let them move on the moment America walked away. And now America is discovering what it feels like to be on the outside of the most important defense and technology alliance being built in the 21st century. We're not banned. We're not excluded by name. We're just not included. We're not part of the planning, not part of the procurement, not part of the decision-making. We've gone from being the indispensable nation to being an outsider in the span of 72 hours. That's the cost of arrogance. That's the cost of treating reliability as optional. That's the cost of believing that power is about dominance instead of partnership. So where does this leave us? It leaves us watching the architecture of global power shift in real time. It leaves American defense contractors scrambling to find new markets while their European competitors capture the largest defense build-out in modern history. It leaves the dollar facing long-term structural pressure it hasn't seen since the Bretton Woods system collapsed. It leaves American military bases in Europe operating on borrowed time. And it leaves investors who understand what's happening with opportunities that won't be obvious to most people for another 6 months or a year. The repricing is going to happen. The capital is going to flow toward European defense, toward commodities, toward currencies that support the new architecture. The question is whether you position yourself ahead of that shift or after. But most importantly, it leaves America in a position we haven't been in since 1945, not as the automatic center of the developed world's security and economic architecture, but as one power among several, as a country that has to compete for influence instead of assuming it, as a nation trying to figure out how to operate in a world where being the largest economy doesn't automatically mean being the most important. Trump thought he was negotiating, but Europe wasn't at the negotiating table. They'd already left. They'd already built the alternative, and they were just waiting for him to give them permission to use it. He gave them that permission, and now we're all living in the world that decision created.